Welcome everyone to the Co-Creators Convergence Thursday conversation. And we're doing this weekly now, not just monthly. My name is Noelle Marshall, and along with my beloved here, Bob Warner, we call ourselves Light Partners.
Good evening.
And we're kind of shepherds of the Co-Creators Convergence. So I'm going to turn this over to Olivia Cheever, who is going to introduce our guest tonight. I'm really looking forward to this. And so without any further ado, over to you, Olivia.
Thank you, Noelle. And thanks to Co-Creators Convergence for bringing us all together Thursday nights. It's fascinating. I'm so delighted to welcome Annie Spade, who is a Montessori educator from way back. She's been involved in this since 1982. And in 1993, she co-founded a nonprofit school in Austin, Texas, which is called the Montessori, I remember it has a Epiphany, right? Montessori Epiphany. And it's a wonderful early childhood school, and she'll tell you more about that. She's continuing to teach and direct that today, but this year she's also launched the Montessori Home Project to provide one-on-one coaching for parents and others in supporting young children via the Montessori approach at home or in other settings. And we know that's really important with COVID. The project also promotes a kindling of the young child's magical potential to be at home in the natural world, which Annie believes must play a key role in the healing of our planet. And she was introduced to Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the French paleontologist, among other things, at the age of 11. And now she's serving as the administrator of the Teilhard de Chardin page on Facebook. This page is highly active and engaging and currently serves over 8,000 members.
Hi
Yes.
there, Noelle.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming back. Just one small issue here. I actually can't, I have to have you be co-host, not host, in order to be able to let people in. So you still have the same functionality, and
Okay.
we actually are only able to do that out here. So I really appreciate you coming back. I apologize for that. I wasn't aware of the technical,
Right.
how it worked that way.
We're all
Yeah,
learning.
if you can send it back to me.
Okay, so you're going to make me co-host now?
What you have to do first is make me host, and then I make
Okay.
you co-host. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know why they put us into a breakout room, but maybe there's a better solution. So now you're going to make me co-host, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, and then you can let Patty in. Welcome, Patty. Okay, and then you go put me back in the room. Oh, I just go to breakout rooms. Now I can go?
Yep, you can go. Thanks very much, Noelle.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. I appreciate your dedication.
Thanks for.
And there they were at the opening of the first Native American embassy in the United States, which was happening on the Hudson River in downstate New York. I don't know if you call it that, but I looked up where Stony Point was and realized it was right across the Hudson River from Teilhard de Chardin's grave. And so I just thought that was a beautiful synchronicity and energy because, you know, Catholic Church was a big driver behind a lot of what happened with all of the colonization and everything. And so I reached out to Peter Melton, who will be our speaker next week, who was the primary person taking the Unity Earth team across, and reached out to him to just let him know about the energy. And I just thought it was wonderful. Well, Peter, in his usual enthusiastic way, and this is part of the introduction of Peter for next week, he says, well, we should go. So I thought, wow, well, that's wonderful. And so before I knew it, Ben Bowler, Unity Earth's executive director, said, well, let's broadcast from the cemetery on Tuesday night. And So, and Chief Dwayne Perry, who is chief of the Ramapo Lenape Nation, on whose land the embassy was opened at Stony Point. He was going as well. And I just, so beautiful. Well, they got there, and long story short, the cemetery was closed to visitors because of COVID. Well, not to be deterred, Ben said, let's still convene together. And I'm going to get my dad, who was a huge inspiration to Ben and to Ben's inspiration for Unity Earth, honestly. So we were about 20 of us on the call that night. And I shared that night, and Noelle and Bob were on there, and lo and behold, so many people got to share their love of Teilhard that night, and then this opportunity for us to come together and share about our mutual love of Teilhard. And so with that introduction, I just want to acknowledge how Teilhard de Chardin has Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and he had an even longer name when he was born, several other names that he had as the fourth of 11 children, born in the south of France in 1881. That he has had such an amazing influence and outreach that continues to grow almost exponentially, I would say. And we can name so many thought leaders. Noelle already mentioned Barbara Marks Hubbard, and we've got Brian Swim, Richard Rohr, so many of our thought leaders, and so many of us who are thought leaders as well, who have been influenced by him in one way or another. We should get to know him a little more. And, with Teilhard, he was such a prolific writer. He actually only has 2 full books, The Divine Milieu and Phenomenon of Man. His other works are collections of essays and several collections of letters, personal letters. He kept up an amazing correspondence, kept a journal, a personal journal. So he was just an unbelievable master of the pen, and that he did everything else he did in his life on top of it is really something to aspire to, because of all the introspection that goes with writing. But what I wanted to do tonight is to really focus on Teilhard as a person, because I think that's really where his power comes in. His prose has been said to be some of the most poetic prose that has ever been written. It is so beautiful. And so rich. I heard Richard Rohr say one time, Teilhard had an unbelievable impact on my life, but please don't ask me to ever quote him. His words are so rich and beautiful, and there's so much truth and power in them. But that really came from Teilhard's personal life. And I know another little synchronicity is that a number of people here were influenced by, continue to be influenced by, and students of Jean Houston. And many of you know that Jean had a relationship with Teilhard. What is so fascinating about that is the way that happened. And I wanted to share just a little excerpt from Jean's own account of that. What happened was she was 14 and suffering a lot of anxiety at that time in her life. Many of us do at 14, but she had other extenuating circumstances with her family. And so she had taken up running to help her to work some of the energy off in Central Park. And Teilhard was honestly exiled to the United States at that time. And this was less than 2 years before he died. So in 1953, roughly. And so she's running in Central Park. Now, her account says that she ran smack into him and knocked the wind out of him. So hopefully she didn't knock him all the way down. He was in his 70s, but she ran literally into Teilhard, walking in Central Park when she was 14. And they started up a relationship because she saw him again the next day. And I wanted to just read to you a little bit of what she had to say about her experience of him, because it will really open the door to everything we're going to share about tonight. And she knew him only as Mr. Teilhard, which I know is terrible French, probably, Olivia, but he pronounced Teilhard in the French to her, and she knew him as Teilhard, T-A-Y-E-R. So she says, the walks were magical and full of delight. Not only did Mr. Teilhard seem to have absolutely no self-consciousness, but he was always being seized by wonder and astonishment over the simplest things. He was constantly and literally falling in love. I remember one time when he suddenly fell on his knees, his long Gaelic nose raking the ground, and exclaimed to me, "Jean, look at the caterpillar." I joined him on the ground to see what had evoked so profound a response that he was seized by the essence of a caterpillar. How beautiful it is, he remarked. This little green being with its wonderful, funny little feet. Exquisite. Little furry body, little green feet on the road to metamorphosis. He then regarded me with equal delight. Jean, can you feel yourself to be a caterpillar? Oh, yes, I replied with the baleful knowing of a gangly, pimply-faced teenager. Then think of your own metamorphosis, he suggested. What will you be when you become a butterfly? Un papillon, eh? What is the butterfly of Jean? What a great question for a 14-year-old. His long, Gothic, comic, tragic face would nod with wonder. Eh, Jean? Look at the clouds. God's calligraphy in the sky. All that transforming, moving, changing, dissolving, becoming. Jean, become a cloud and become all the forms that ever were. We can stop right there. So I'm going to begin with Teilhard's childhood. I don't know, Noelle, do you have the pictures that I sent to Karen earlier or anything? Just, I'd like to have his image. I had first his gravesite, and you could go through that. It's his gravesite, then there's an image of him, and then an image of him as a child. So maybe we can pause a moment at least on his image just to kind of get an image of the man.
Let me see. You probably can't see my screen yet. Hold on a second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes. So there's a little image of his stone in the cemetery, and he's just right in the middle of all his Jesuit brothers. And I got to visit just shortly before Ben did in 2016. I was blessed to go there, and pilgrims put plants on his grave, replant it in the seasons, and leave little treasures on it. It's very lovely and very peaceful. It's on the grounds of what used to be the Jesuit seminary.
Okay,
Next, yeah, let's go to an image of him.
so I'm trying to get it to go to the next one.
Okay.
Photos. That's what I get for having these all ready. There we go. You want a young image? Here's a,
There he is.
can you see that one?
Mhm. Yes, thank you, Noel. Yes.
Oh.
So this is he's on expedition in China here, which he spent close to half of his life.
Do you know what year that would be?
That particular photo,
Roughly.
I cannot say for sure. I can look it up later, Claire. It's
30s or something,
quite young, that
1930?
image. He's quite young.
Yeah, but like, would that be the 1930s?
Yes, roughly. Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
So cool.
Do you want another picture, Annie?
Yeah, then you can go to one of him as a child. So this is the one young photo we have of Teilhard, and I really wanted to share this one because he says that he had this strange early attraction to things that were permanent and lasting. So from a very early age, he was seeking that, and he said his very earliest memory was having his hair trimmed and his locks thrown in the fire, and his horror at seeing something that was him just consumed and made to disappear like that. And so I kind of almost wonder if it was in preparation for this photo so they could curl his hair and so he went from that to there were lots of iron leavings around in the countryside there in the south of France, and so he took to collecting them, the most massive little chunks of iron that he could find, and he did this for a while and just roaming the countryside and falling in love with it at the same time. But that seemed to be permanent, you know, he thought the iron was, and then he discovered one day that it would rust. And this was very distressing to him. And so he transferred his search and he went on to rocks. And so here he felt much more that he had found something that had that kind of lasting quality to it. And you can see that thread, that hunger, where he's got that that urge, that vision is in him from birth to be seeking this. So I just wanted to ground that there, and I'll give you a little flavor of it. Now, his very best biography, I think just one everyone agrees, is this one by Ursula King, which was republished in 2015, and it's just gorgeous. I got this photo from there, and there are just so many beautiful quotes and photos. It's truly an album of his life. And she says here, "It was amid the volcanic hills of southern France that young Pierre first experienced, quote, the crimson glow of matter, the divine radiating from the depths of blazing matter," which is another later quote of his, but he experiences this, the divine radiating from the depths of blazing matter. It was his living contact with the earth when touching and caressing rocks, plants, stones, that disclosed to him a deep sense of both the solidity and the fragility of life. He first experienced his vocation here, his calling to chart the history of the cosmos and the rise of human life on Earth. So Teilhard grew up in a devout home. Noelle, if you want to take the photo down, and we'll just continue here with an overview of his life. And so he feels a call to a seminary to begin studies at a young age. And he's sent to the Jersey Shore because there's some kind of anti-religious movement in France as he's moving into his late teens. And so he goes to the Jersey Shore. So imagine he's grown up in the volcanic hills and collecting his rocks and getting to know that landscape, which was quite rough. And he goes on to the fossil reefs of the Jersey Shore and begins exploring there and the ocean. And he said that, you know, he felt the divine vibrations continuing to run through all things, even there. But you see how this begins to expand his vision. And from there, he went on to Egypt for 3 years. So there he's in the desert. And he said that, you know, it was just so exotic and so filled with open spaces. And he, again, just fell in love with the way the light fell on the landscape and the completely different sort of landscape. And he wasn't much taken in by the people there, anywhere that he went. He was just so focused on the landscape, most of all. Actually, Ursula King says that Egypt's tranquil, calm, and entrancing beauty echoed in him for the rest of his life. So even though he spent many years in many decades, almost 3 decades, in the Chinese deserts, that initial experience, yes, well, initial experience in Egypt actually began this kind of urge in him of, you know, maybe I want to be more like a monastic, and I'm not sure I want to be involved with, you know, the people. Like he was just so desirous of spending more time in nature and with his rocks, which he was studying geology by this time. And he had something of a desire to escape all of the noise and activities and social relations. But he took this to his heart and said no, that he recognized that somehow all this human life and activity was a part of it all, and that he needed to overcome his sense of, he has almost a sense of foreboding at one point. There's a quote that I don't have where I can read it to you, but he says something about it being a terrifying thing to have been born a human. But he commits himself to integrating the human with all that he's falling in love with the natural world, and to overcome his fear. He's called back to Great Britain to study again. And this time he's introduced to the idea of evolution via Henry Bergson's work. And he just immediately disagrees with, he doesn't disagree with evolution, but he disagrees with the way that Bergson imagines it, because Bergson describes it as coming from source, but then diverging into all these different life forms. And Teilhard immediately says, no, It's a process of evolutionary creation of convergent cosmogenesis. So he immediately sees, I think because of his deep experience and contemplative mind and way of being in the world, he recognizes that there's something about us being drawn together that is creating life, that it's not just the scattering, kind of diverging kind of an image that Bergson was giving. So after spending some more time in Great Britain, a short bit of time, about three more years studying there, then he's goes back to Paris. And this is an exciting time with lots of connections made. And during this time, he visits the painted caves in Spain. Now, it doesn't mention the painted caves of France, Lascaux, but it mentions the Altamira caves in Spain, which, if you know about these caves, they're just exquisitely painted. And the dating on these is 30,000 plus years. There's a beautiful book called The Cave Painters by Gregory Curtis that I read a few years ago. And actually there's a photo of Teilhard in there, and it mentions his visit, although he's not a big figure in it. But Gregory Curtis says that the paintings in those caves rival anything that was painted in the Renaissance. Yeah. So Teilhard, this does not escape Teilhard. He's much impressed. At this point, he's more of a fossil hunter, geologist, but this is really life-changing. He says, these are his words: "I can assure you, seeing these remains of a mankind earlier than any known civilization really gives you something to think about. I love staying alone there, looking at them in absolute silence, broken only by the sound of water dripping from the stalactites. I found a marvelous sight in one section where the roof is covered with magnificent bison, painted in 3 colors, red, yellow, and black, and with an extraordinary degree of clarity and expression. When you think that these were drawn during an age when Egyptian culture was still non-existent, you are completely amazed." So this is in 1913 that he sees the Altamira caves. So somebody do the math real quick. He's in his early 30s. And this sparks his interest in paleontology and human origins. Well, the very next year, World War I begins. And thus begins a part of his life that is absolutely phenomenal. It was customary for the ordained to become a medical orderly or a chaplain and kind of work in a remote hospital kind of setting. And Teilhard, he says, no, this is part of his immersion into the human story. He says, no, I want to be on the front. I want to be a stretcher bearer. So he does, and his regiment is actually involved in every major battle of World War I that you could name. They apparently were, even someone that was a stretcher bearer and not an actual combatant was given ranks. Well, he refused anything above a corporal. They wanted to promote him above corporal, and he refused. His bravery was just so marked. His regimen had the highest regard, and he was awarded the French Legion of Honor medal afterwards at the request of his regimen. His regimen was mainly from North Africa, and it lists out, I mean, Moroccans and Sudanese and, you know, just many Muslim fighters were in his regiment. And, you know, he says he did what he could, you know, spiritually for them. He had no injuries. This is, and so, you know, as this went on for 4 years, he was on the front lines serving as a stretcher bearer. And imagine he had no illnesses, no injuries. So they came up with a name for him. And I couldn't begin to pronounce it, and I don't have it for you, but they gave a name for him, which was, you know, divinely protected, you know, beloved of God. That was their special little nickname for him. So I'm going to give you a couple of little excerpts about his musings, as you could imagine, or what Ursula King has to say about it. And then I'll tell you something else about what he was doing during this time. Teilhard experienced a new sense of camaraderie and fellow feeling, and discovered more than ever before the sense and meaning of human realities. In the face of imminent danger, bloodshed, and frequent loss of life, in the terrible fight of the trenches, he discovered a powerful new vision not seen before. And here, among all the painful suffering and loss of life, his great vision of humankind as truly one first emerged, of humanity sharing a common origin and destiny in spite of all its diversity and divisions. The war immersed him in an ocean of humanity where he discovered yet another dimension of life, the sense of the human in all its organic complexity. He writes all during this time. He begins writing these essays. He writes 18 essays that are part of his canon that we still enjoy so much today. And this was a time that he really developed his poetic prose. He writes so beautifully and deeply. He was so, you could imagine being in that situation where he is constantly confronted with these situations and so immersed in the human struggle of his comrades that that he writes so poignantly. And he also, as you could well imagined every day that he would die. And so he had a real urgency about getting it down, because the seeds of everything that he would write later in his life so eloquently and beautifully, those seeds were already germinated here. And so, you know, Ursula King says, you know, he would express it at this time, and later on it was kind of more embellished and developed, but it was the same sense of things that he had already by the age of 40. He certainly had, because of these experiences. Of these 18 essays, she says that all his previous experiences fused together into one great mystical vision. And that mystical vision was the sense that evolution had a starting point, but was also moving towards cohesion once more. So everything that rises must converge. That sense that is so Teilhardian, that we almost don't even, we just take it for granted and can't even hardly find it in his writing, said that particular way, but said in 1,000 other ways. He sees that through all creation, there is this co-create, this coming together that brings the next thing. And he says, if humans are where we are now, then it doesn't stop. Humans are the leading edge. And so he was just all about not just the human being, but the human becoming, you know, to not just be self-satisfied with, oh, well, we're Homo sapiens, so here we are. But, you know, we're the driving edge of evolution here. So, you know, what are we doing with that? So it becomes more and more interested in how do we spark this up? And so let's see, I wanted to share one more little passage here, and we're going to move on to another big Teilhardian concept. Let's see. Oh, yes. So he's recognizing that many people are not ready. He says, even in this century, men are still living as chance circumstances decide for them, with no aim but their daily bread or a quiet old age. You can count the few who fall under the spell of a task that far exceeds the dimensions of their individual lives. After having for so long done no more than allow itself to live, humankind will one day understand that the time has come to undertake its own development and to mark its one road. During all of his life, as I say, he was keeping up correspondence with around a dozen friends, at least. We have those collections of letters, and one of my favorites is his letters to Leontine Zanta, Mademoiselle Zanta, who was older than he was, and she met him he met her during a leave during World War I, but they became lifelong friends until she died in the 40s. And I just wanted to share this passage because he's really speaking to us, and I've loved this passage because I've taken it as inspiration for myself for many years. He says, I understand your anxiety about not being up to the level of your task. This is one of the great human problems. You have to face this problem squarely, in God's truth and light, given that we live under this sun. Tell yourself categorically that for the success of the enormous work of creation, God only needs one thing, that you should do your best. As soon as you give what you are capable of giving, you are united in maximum measure to the creative act. You couldn't be a more useful servant. You must grasp this crucial point. Only one thing matters in life, and that is to keep exactly to the place willed by God that is indicated at every moment by the equilibrium established by our effort and the resistance of things. So long as we are in this place, we are a faithful and supremely useful atom in the universe, truly annexed to the body and heart of Christ. So I wanted to open up for comments, anything that is coming up for anyone. This is a conversation. And I don't know if there's been something in the chat. I know some have been looking at the chat for me. Maybe you can bring out a question if there was something or a thought.
If you want to ask a question or make a comment, just wave your hand and I'll unmute you. Okay, so I'm going to unmute Claire. She's been asking a lot of questions, good questions.
Unmute.
I have that beginner's thing. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Yes.
Okay. So what's coming up for me is I have this 5-year-old child, my granddaughter, and she is so magical. And her, I mean, she's wow. And I just feel like she's on the verge of this new human. And it's, you know, and she's a full feeler. That's what her chiropractor said. She's a full feeler. She's off the chart. And I don't know if I can say this. This is quite self-disclosing, but I don't know these people, but she was born a boy, you know, with a penis. And she's a girl. She's 5 years old. And she's like, I'm a girl. And, you know, we're like, okay. And she's so creative. I mean, to me, I'm an artist. She's off the chart creative. And I exalt her. And for some reason, I think you might have some positive thing for me.
Yeah, we could definitely have some conversation about that at some point, Claire. That's
Yeah.
a particular challenge for her.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm going to definitely be talking about the child in just a moment. I'm looking at my time and going, okay, I need to move Teilhard along a little bit so I can say a little bit more about the child. But yeah,
Annie,
you're spot on to see.
Marco would also like to make a comment or a question.
Yes, please. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was just thinking what a privilege it is to have that little child in your life right now. And so many people I've heard about many children around that age who are spectacular, and many people are labeling them as indigo children. Have you heard that term before?
Hmm.
Indigo children, which is supposed to be like a really special kind of upcoming human.
Right.
Awesome. I do have questions, but I'm going to hold mine till the end because I know you want to move along. But if anyone else has a question, you can also put it in the chat and we'll collect them. And
If we can, yep.
but this is fascinating. I'm
Yeah.
just really, you know, I got to at least read the biography. What was the name of the woman who did the biography?
Spirit of Fire.
The Spirit of Fire.
Ursula King. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
It's gorgeous. Yeah. So, so I'm gonna
Put that in the chat.
Yeah, maybe Olivia could do that or someone. So I'm gonna, I just thought that the way she put this about his understanding of the noosphere, because it's commonly understood that Teilhard and Berdiansky, a Russian philosopher, kind of, sometimes you read it both ways, that which one came up with the noosphere first, this kind of idea of the thinking, the conscious, human consciousness sphere of the earth, that he recognized that humanity has created something that surrounds the globe. And so the noosphere is often, or the internet, I should say, is often seen as, that Teilhard had a vision of that, a premonition of that, prophesied that. And it's interesting because the time that's given is typically the mid 1920s, like 1925. Well, already in 1918, he's writing about something that he doesn't quite call it that, but he calls it the anthroposphere. And 1918 is when he's in the trenches. And this is when he first begins to write about this. And so I'm going to give you just a little bit of intro from Ursula, and then what he actually says one night when he's in the trenches. She says, since the war, Teilhard had realized that humankind formed a single whole, a large cosmic reality that far transcended individuals and groups. This human reality could be studied and was like a dynamic living organism that covered the entire globe, a network whose threads stretched over the face of the whole earth. At first, in the trenches, he had likened this vision to the rise of an immense thing, the rise of a unified new earth, which he compared to the rising of the full moon over a sleeping world. In January 1918, he wrote, I have just been watching the moon rise over the crest of the nearby trenches. The timid, slim crescent of earlier evenings has gradually grown to a full and shining disk. Solitary and majestic, the moon, which a fortnight before had been invisible, disengaged itself from the ridges of black soil and seemed to glide across the barbed wire. In this shining body that hangs in the heavens, I greet a new symbol. Is it the moon that rises over the dark trenches this evening? Or is it the earth, a unified earth, a new earth? So that's the true beginning of the noosphere.
Wow. Let me know when you're ready for another question.
Okay. Well, there's one more part that I'm going
Okay. Go ahead.
to go real quickly on, just to say that there was one more thing that Teilhard, one more ingredient, let's say, in the Teilhard.
I love that.
In the Teilhard pie. And that was the feminine. So, Teilhard, as it began honestly with his cousin, Marguerite, who was less than a year older than him. And they had, been friends as children. And then he meets up with her when he's in Paris, when he went to see the Altamira caves, when he was studying in Paris for 3 years. Marguerite was there. And so by now they're adults. And so they begin to share. And so he begins to write to her from the trenches. And Ursula King says they fell in love. Pure and simple. And there was another time later. His recognized love of his life was Lucille Swan, who he met in China many years later. But he and Marguerite corresponded throughout their lives, and just really were instrumental in one another's development. And so this is key because again, I just have to read to you what he wrote. This is the last thing I'm going to read to you. So hope you don't mind my reading to you, that they just say it so beautifully. So here's what Ursula King says in this section where he's discovering the fire and the power that is in this particular relationship with Marguerite. She says, it became clear to Teilhard that the powers of sexual attraction and human love not only have deep cosmic roots, but that the human propensity toward loving union, the attraction of person to person set off by a spark and bursting into flame, is part of an immense universal process of unification that he sees at work everywhere in the universe. There are many more beautiful passages between him and Marguerite and Lucille, and also he wrote, I promised that I would reveal the source of this quote someday after mastering the wind, the waves, the ether, we will harness for God the energies of love. On that day, for the second time in the history of the world, we will have discovered fire. This is the concluding sentence of his essay, The Evolution of Chastity, that he wrote after he and Lucille had been friends for some time and had really struggled with what to do with their relationship. He did consider, but not seriously in some sense, because every time he took it to his heart, he said, no, this is not my calling. And over time and what he wrestles with, I mean, I was so amazed when I read that essay because of the fearlessness. I mean, this man, and this is, you can get this by now, right? This man is just, he doesn't stop. You know, he's going to dig into it. And if he's challenged by something, he says, in fact, he says in that essay, I say pour on more fire. He says, you feel like you're burning, then pour on more fire and see what happens. He draws out in this, you can imagine, in this essay that, you know, human sexual relations have had to do with procreation, that's been one value, or one way. And then there's a second way, which is the way of the celibate and the virgin, you know, and that's the way of shunning it and shutting it off. And he says, there's way too much power here. And this is the power, by the way, that brought the quarks together. Of course, they didn't have quarks in those days. He actually uses the word corpuscle. And I thought, I haven't heard that word in decades. What does the word even mean? And, you know, way back when I studied science, corpuscle was, you know, like the smallest of the small, you know. So, you know, the coming together of things, that there's something, and there's a beautiful passage of, you know, read to you too much, but, you know, just talking about, you know, what brings the birds to have these beautiful songs and these feathers and just all of the different things that we find in the diversity and magnificence of creation, that this is all driven by Eros. Now, he doesn't use that word, but Barbara Marx Hubbard does, you know, and so I was just going to say that this was his final, or his, you know, to kind of complete the Teilhard pie, since I call it the Teilhard pie, you know, was to delve into this energy and to recognize that this is the driving co-creative force, or, you know, power in that positive way that, again, Barbara Marx Hubbard and so many have drawn out, that power is not a bad thing. But we've had a situation, we've had some centuries, if not millennia, of eros versus the patriarchy, you know, and the patriarchy being all about how we can manipulate and control and shut down and, you know, transmute what is our birthright, which is to really fall in love with one another. That's where the co-creative power lies. So I'm going to stop there and see what we want to say about that.
So Annie, we do have a question, and it falls right into this. Tex thanks you, and he says, can you kindly elaborate on Teilhard's perspective on the power of love? Which I think you're just, you know, mind reading or mind mapping. But I told him I'd make sure that you would address that.
Yeah.
So, but
yeah, and you know, and Tex, hi Tex. Tex is one of my friends that I've made on the Teilhard page, and so he told me he was going to be here tonight. And he's not Texan, by the way. I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. He's Canadian, which is interesting. But you know, it is all about, I'm sorry, it's all about the baby. It's all about making babies, but not in the way we thought of, you know. It's about our evolution and the co-creative energy that's there, and that it's powerful. You know what, Marianne Williamson, there's that beautiful, everyone, or for a long time, people thought it was Nelson Mandela that said, we're powerful beyond our imagination, you know. Don't let anyone tell you you're not powerful. Who are you to say you're not here to shine? I mean, just like he's counseling Leontine Santa, you know, that we do everything we can, and there will be forces to stop us. And believe me, I'm not getting into it. I've kind of finished what I'm saying about Teilhard, but he didn't get to publish during his entire life because of obedience to the church, because he wanted to stay in that tension, if you will, that third way of not denying his call to priesthood, but yet not being allowed to he couldn't teach anymore in France. And he was in exile in the United States when he died here in 1955 on Easter Sunday. Oh, by the way, I have to tell you about this synchronicity because synchronicity, right? So Barbara Marks Hubbard, she passed away on April 10th, 2019. So 64 years to the day after Teilhard de Chardin. Now, she passed on Good Friday. He passed on Easter Sunday that year. But she died effectively at the same hour he died even. Yeah, because there was a 2-hour difference. She died in the afternoon and he died in the early evening. I mean, it was like the literal same moment 64 years later. Which, not to go into this, but in the Mayan dream spell calendar, that there's a synchronicity there as well. So that is 64, not 65 years. They're both Skywalker days. I mean, they're both, sorry, not Skywalker, they're both hand days, blue hand days. So anyway, not to go into that, but.
I did not know that. Did not know that.
Yeah.
Oh. So as a priest, then he was celibate his whole life. Are we to presume that?
Yes, yes.
That was that third way that you were talking.
Yes. And, you know, Cynthia Bourgeault, if you know her writing, you know, Cynthia Bourgeault was close collaborator with Richard Rohr. The two of them, and there's another person that works there, the Living School that Father Richard does there with the Center for Action and Contemplation, which again, I mean, he absolutely, you know, hands down, he's working Teilhard's vision that all true contemplation must become action. So it's all about, it's got to be becoming. But Cynthia Bourgeault wrote The Meaning of Mary Magdalene. That's a book I can't, if you're interested in the transmuting of, you know, the way we do relationship, to go in and see what she wrote in The Meaning of Mary Magdalene, just really blew my Christianity, my understanding of Christianity wide open, because she says whether or not Mary Magdalene and Jesus consummated with a conjugal relationship or not is beside the point. They were, she actually calls it, and this is, yeah, fifth way lovers. She's using Gurdjieff's philosophy and calling it fifth way. Fifth way lovers, it's beyond death. We will always be together. We will always be co-creative together. I mean, she maintains, which makes so much sense, the woman that anoints him the night before he dies, it's the same woman that's standing there observing the crucifixion. She's there observing when he's laid in the tomb. She's there the next morning. I mean, they're fifth way lovers. Yeah. I mean, they're, and she says it doesn't matter which way the conjugal aspect went. So I don't know if that answers Tex's question at all.
Well,
Go ahead, Margot.
I think the child
it
has something to
appears,
say too, but
it appears that Chardin had that deep fifth way relationship with Marguerite, and possibly the other woman you mentioned,
Lucille,
and
definitely Lucille.
possibly with Jean Houston too.
I mean, he had a number of women friends. Ida Treat, she was, yeah, I mean, I forgot her name, Mortier, Jean Mortier, who kept all of his papers. I mean, he had such rich relationships, and they were so life-giving for both,
I'm sure they
both parties.
I'm sure they influenced him as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. He absolutely says he would not have been able to do what he did, to understand what he understood. And yeah, that, I mean, it's just, yeah. What does he say right here? Man, this is his words. Man gathers powers, pursues beauty, pursues glory, creates beauty, and devotes himself to science. But he often does not realize that under so many different forms, it is always the same passion that inspires him. Purified, transformed, but alive, the attraction of the feminine. That's not actually the passage I thought, but yeah, he absolutely says there's just so much that the women brought to him, those relationships. But he had wonderful relationships with men too. And this is when I started really studying this, you know, it's not necessarily about that tension being there, you know. It's about people that we really, really deeply love, and that spark us. And that's the feminine, that what he calls the feminine, that's eros.
And I wonder if he studied any of the ancient religions like Indian Tantra, the East Indian, because so much of that is that close relationship on fire too, the eros versus the patriarchy too.
The sense I get, yeah, go ahead.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, well, the sense I get is that he just came to this on his own experience. I've not come across anything, you know, any outside influence, if you will, but it's possible. I mean, he was so worldly. I mean, he went on expeditions to Southeast Asia and South Africa later in his life. Yeah, so, you know, just to kind of flesh it out. After the war, he ends up going to China and being on the team that discovered Peking man, and he's just out on expedition for, as I say, close to 30 years. He was in China, either on expedition or, writing in his office in Peking. Not Peking, in what's the main city? Peking. I think it's Peking. Yeah.
Annie, we have more messages here. Another message from Tex. Hello, Annie. I like Barbara Marx Hubbard's expression, suprasexual co-creation, as more evolved than sexual procreation. And then also, she always got a giggle. She's usually talking to an audience of, women over 50, primarily. Okay, David and Bob and the others, but she would say, after our eggs, we don't have any more eggs left, and we go through. She says, not menopause, we go through regenopause, and we regenerate, and we get newer.
Newer every day, right? Yeah.
Barbara was a newer every day.
Newer every day.
It's all a state of mind.
Yep.
So also Olivia shared Cynthia Bourgeau's The Meaning of Mary Magdalene.
Mm-hmm.
And Rita is thanking you for bringing in Cynthia's work. And so this, I have I'm just a practical person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did this guy get around financially to travel to all these places? I want to go to China for 30 years. I want to go to Africa. I want to go to Egypt. And, how is all that done? How did he gets exiled? The Catholic Church pays for him to come to New Jersey?
Of all places.
The Jesuits, and they had a house, and, a big house. And, he just had a little room. It wasn't like, he was given some kind of suite or mansion or somewhere separate to live, but he lived quite austerely. Imagine these expeditions. Now there is she mentions about getting financing, and I know a lot of time he was working with the scientific community, and so they were getting the financing, and then they were inviting him. He was that highly thought of as a scientist. So, it was a different time. The scientist priests, there were many of them. And I thought about that at the beginning, many people at that time, or many men at that time, were mixing, if you will, their science and faith. But, Teilhard took it to a whole different level and integrated it in such a way. Yeah, I think because of the manner of his life. Yes, Olivia. Unmute.
I'm curious about the 11-year-old Annie that encountered Teilhard. Will you say something about that? I know we have to wrap.
Just a few minutes, yeah. Okay, I'll say something real quick about that, and then I'll go on to the child just a little bit. So when I was 11, I was growing up in West Texas, and very devoid oil country. So I always say it's a ravaged land out there, overgrazed, and we had a priest. It was just during the renewal in the Catholic Church, because what happened was Teilhard, as I say, had not been published by 1955 when he died. Well, in 1962, 7 years later, and this is over and over, he's petitioning Rome and he's rewriting his work and trying to explain, and no. 7 years after he dies, the renewal starts in the Catholic Church, Vatican II. Guess whose work undergirds the church in the modern world in particular is one of the teachings that came out of that was heavily influenced by Teilhard, as you can imagine, the church in the modern world. They were very shy about evolution and didn't appreciate that, or were fearful of it. And I actually, Ursula says at one point that he was turned down because the church came back and told him because what he was writing here would be too challenging for the faithful. Indeed. So bring it on. So too challenging for who though? Maybe the hierarchy. So what happened when I was 11, we had this French Canadian priest came through for 1 year, and he had studied Teilhard. And so this would have been, I was 11 in 1967. So this is 5 years after the renewal has started, and everyone's still kind of, why are we doing these things? What's going on? So this young priest comes breezing in from Canada, and he starts talking about Teilhard, and he starts doing twice weekly sessions. And this was, he would do the same session on Tuesday night and on Thursday night. And this is so mamas could come on, because everybody had umpteen children. There were 8 in our family. I'm the oldest of 8. And, you know, mama could come on Tuesday night and daddy could come on Thursday night, and all the adults would be on board. I mean, this guy was brilliant. He told me this was the 1 year in his life, I met up with him some years later, 1 year in his life that he was in a parish. And boy, did he have some influence. And so, of course, he would speak about Teilhard from the pulpit. My parents were all excited. So I'm thinking, okay, I can't read this person, but I will. One day I will. And so I went away to Texas A&M, of all schools, if you know anything about Texas A&M. Anyway, I went to A&M to study psychology because I wanted to do something different in education, and thought psychology would be the way. And very first weekend, I'm introduced through my next door neighbors, because I'm living in an apartment, introduced, I'm 17 actually, when I first went off to school, and introduced to a young man who had gone to a progressive Catholic high school in Houston and been introduced to Teilhard by his theology teacher. And he's wanting to read more of Teilhard also. So we got this little bitty book called Building the Earth. And so and that's what I quoted during our sharing the other night, Noel, was the age of nations is past. The task before us now, if we would not perish, is to build the earth. And I mean, as a 17 going on 18-year-old, that just won my heart. I just said, oh, we got to go there. So yeah, so real quickly, Maria Montessori. Maria Montessori, so she's a contemporary. She was born in 1870, or he was born in 1881. And they're both Catholic kids. She's born in Europe and Italy, but she's an only child. It's kind of interesting. But she's a visionary. I mean, she was very sick when she was very young at one point, and her parents, of course, are terrified that she's going to die. And she says, do not worry about me. I have so much work to do. Like, she already could see, you know. So we don't have near the kind of writings about her that we do about Teilhard, but I have no doubt this woman was steeped in some of the same culture and had that initiative in her. And she becomes she begins lecturing about, this is after she started her teaching with Montessori, but I just want to say that she was sought after as one to lecture about peace. So all over Europe. And this is between the world wars. And when you read those offerings, those speeches that she gave on peace, you're just amazed that she had that level of insight into what we needed to do to create the new humanity. And, you know, and she was all focused on the child. You know, we got to start doing something different with our children. So she was the first woman in Italy to graduate as a doctor, medical doctor. She couldn't even do the dissecting with the men. That was considered improper. So she had to do her dissections alone at night. So you see, you know, some stresses that brought her through, but she was determined and she wanted to research human development. And of course, you know, this was on a physical level to begin with. They did lots of measuring of children in those days to make sure they were growing and all this kind of thing. She became interested in education, though, early on, and the whole child. And she was finally given some children that had defects, as they called children that had different challenges in those days. And she got them passing the state exams in 1 year by using hands-on materials. And so she said, gosh, you know, if we could have that kind of result with hands-on materials, treating the child as a whole child instead of, okay, be as still as possible and let me impart some knowledge to you kind of style that we all recognize and was going on even then. And so she was finally given some preschool age children in a working class quarter of Rome. And she started just actually instructing other people to work with them and telling them what to do and giving them some materials. And then she sat back and took notes and observed. She was the scientist on the team. And I always say that Maria Montessori was willing to sit at the feet of the child, as honestly Jesus instructed us over and over to do. Unless you become as little children, welcome the children. Unless you change and become as a little child, you will not enter the kingdom. Right? He says this over and over. It's in all three synoptic gospels repeatedly. Yeah. And so we say, you know, are those just platitudes? And oh, you know, the little child is humble and meek or what? No. I mean, it's even in the peaceable kingdom prophecy in Isaiah. And a little child will lead them. The lion will lay down with the lamb. Yep. There will be no more harm or ruin on all my holy mountain, and a little child will guide them. So Maria sat at the feet of the child, and she did not expect anything. She really was open. And the first thing she saw, what she heard from the child, is the child wants to participate. These children wanted to know, how can I mop the floor? How can I scrub a table? Would you show me how to button myself? You know, help me to help myself, is what she says the child said to her over and over. So at that time, there wasn't even furniture the right size for children. She was the first one to have little chairs and tables made for them. So, you know, and a little mop. You know, of course, there were no mops for children in those days. You know, she started in 1907. 1907 is when she opened this first children's house that I mentioned. And she didn't know what would happen. And slowly but surely, the children became so focused and deeply absorbed in what they would do, because she allowed them to choose their own work and to say what they would like to do. And she gave them the tools, the means with which to participate in life. Now, can you see Teilhard in here? To participate in life from this early age. And when you think about it, life habits are formed by 6. It's the most impressionable time. Montessori said the child incarnates their environment. And this is absolutely true. When you think of children being born in cultures all over the world, languages all over the world, and ways of life, you know, a child growing up on the dirt in the bush in Africa versus in a high rise, you know, in New York City, you know, our children adapt. The child incarnates. They have a huge power and capacity. And so this is the time that we should be nourishing that. So here's the thing. Okay. I know I've got 3 minutes, right? The child. Okay. So I want to say 2 things real fast. One is, when we think of the child incarnating their environment. Okay. I'll say this first. Maria Montessori was a deeply spiritual person. She saw that the child was a natural contemplative. They became so absorbed in their activity when given the opportunity. she never got to fully understand the child's spiritual capacity. She died in 1952, 3 years before Teilhard in Amsterdam. 2 of her disciples took that work up in 1954 and began to really try to understand the spirituality, the spiritual potential, as they called it, of the young child. And they identified 5 potentials. I'm going to highlight one of them for sure. The young child is naturally metaphysical, that they just know and see things. This is where, like, love beyond death, like they so get it that we're still connected to someone we love after they died. I've had this happen over and over with my children over the years. The young child is essential. They don't want every single Bible story in the book and the Old Testament and all this stuff. Tell me about when Jesus was born. Tell me about when he died and rose up. That's what they wanted, was the essentials. The Christian tradition was used to identify these, but they are universal qualities, that the child would be essential, the child is metaphysical, the child has deep joy that will show itself, and the child's prayer is gratitude, overflowing gratitude. The 5th characteristic is the child has an amazing capacity to fall in love. In fact, that's their nature, to fall in love. If you've been around a 3-year-old child, I experienced this with my own children and with my grandchildren, and now with my students very often around the age of 3, the little child will come to you numerous times a day. I love you. I love you, mommy, right? I love you too, sweetie. What is that all about? The child is falling in love. The child has been in love, and now they've got language to express it. And so this is fed by the child's sense of wonderment as well, because the child, as I say, is metaphysical. So they right away, these researchers, if you will, recognize that the child has a relationship with God. They just don't, they need language, and they want to know more about it and understand it, and be able to enjoy it more. And so their sense of wonderment is what really fuels this. And the other thing that really fuels it, that we've touched on so deeply with Teilhard, is the earth is meant to be a second womb. When we think in the Western world about the way that, and I should say the first world, the way that we raise our children, that we put an infant in a human-made environment, give them a mobile to look at, some kind of human constructed thing. Maybe they get to go out in a stroller sometimes, but that is like the extent of it until they get to be a good bit older. When you think that the birthright of an infant would be to be out in the air and feeling the breeze and hearing the bird song and seeing the patterns of the leaves, this is what the child would absorb. This is their home. When I just mentioned about the child adapting to life on the bush, in Africa or the tundra and, Mongolia or in a high rise, those powers of incarnation are meant to be used in connection with their second womb, with where we are. Where am I? And so go figure why we have such a disconnect from our mother, the earth. And there's so many ways to do this, but, and the thing is, when I'm speaking of this, another Jesuit theologian, I can't think of his name right now, but he said, the young child in us never dies. those questions never die in us. So it's never too late. That yearning, that hunger is still there for all of us. But we also need to be doing it with our children, and they can lead us home with their wonderment and their joy and gratitude.
Was it Matthew Fox?
Matthew Fox.
Mhm.
What about him?
Well, he said that we weren't born with original sin, we were born with original blessing.
Blessing. Yes,
Mhm.
indeed.
He's also a great follower of
Teilhard. Yep.
Right. Yeah.
Well, this has been absolutely wonderful. Olivia, do you want to close up or?
I'm so grateful the way that you put together this whole, I love Maria Montessori. I haven't had a chance to really know more about her, and I love Teilhard, and I love synchronicity. And so I think it's wonderful the way you brought this all together, and what a feast. Annie, if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
Let's see, what is? Well, you can go to Montessori Home Project. That's my latest little dream, and that way it won't get lost, because
In the
Montessori Home Project. You can email me anniespade9@gmail.
She's also a part of our co-creators Convergence. And she also has a very active Facebook page with for Teilhard de Chardin with over 8,000 people.
That's right. And if you want to join that page, just be sure to answer the questions. We're very, very serious about that. And I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity. This has been like a dream of mine. Y'all, I'm going to use my Texan. Y'all don't know. I mean, all these decades, it's been Teilhard and Montessori, and never the twain shall meet, except I'm just, itching to be able to share about it. So,
Well, I would have given you another hour for the Montessori part.
Oh man, I could come back sometime.
Yeah.
When it's synchronous.
wonderful.
Yeah, and Peter Melton is supposed to be next week. I thought he would be here today. I've introduced him slightly here. We'll give him some more introduction. It's my understanding that he will be here next week to share about his experience in bringing the caravan across, bringing us with him across. He and the Maldo brothers were the threesome, I believe, right? Of Noel, yeah, that traversed, and he has a background, Peter, in sportscasting. So, he started us off at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco and just went all the way through to these Native American sites, and just such an amazing journey. So that should be quite a treat next week. I'm looking forward to that. Peter is a gem. He's Mr. Enthusiasm. So
Thank
you so much. You've gotten many thank yous here in the chat. So I'm going to save the chat for you.
Please do. Thank you. I haven't been able to see it.
Thank you, Annie.
Oh, thank you all so much. You're welcome.
And
thank you, Olivia.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Annie. This was a wonderful evening.
And thank you, Bob and Noel, for creating this for all of us.
And thank you to the conversation. Thank you to the folks at the conversation who also host this and let us buzz in every Thursday. And it's really, really awesome what they're doing. And we contribute in the way that we know best, just like Teilhard would like for us to do. So thank you all. And good evening. Thank you, Olivia. Annie, spectacular.
Really
spectacular.
Not already, check out the Co-Creators Convergence Facebook page.
Wonderful.
We'll have recording of this on the Co-Creators website within a couple of days.
Oh, great.
As we do the archives for the last 6 years, our archives of calls.
Wow.
So thank you. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Bernie, for the thumbs up. Great to see you again, Margot.
Hey,
Yeah,
Patty.
Bernie's giving us
Yeah.
a thumbs up.
Carol, everyone.
Heal
Bye,
fast,
Pat.
Thank y'all
Noel.
so much.
Thank
Night,
you.
Albuquerque.